The next artist we'll study is Vincent van Gogh. He's definitely one of those artists that many students already know a little bit about, but let's come into a more clear picture of what it is that he offers in this post-impressionistic style that we're studying. So Vincent van Gogh comes from the Netherlands, and we've had some really amazing artists come from this region. If you remember studying from the Baroque era, we had Rembrandt, we also had Vermeer, and we've seen artists over time develop a quite traditional style from that area, mainly domestic scenes, focus on naturalism. The list would also include Rachel Roy. So to compare that tradition that's found in the Netherlands to Vincent van Gogh is a really strong contrast. Vincent van Gogh does have a new style, and it's something that's almost a personal style. He's inspired by some of the other artists who he met, namely Paul Gauguin, who we'll study, but really he has his own approach to art, and that's what's so refreshing about studying his paintings is it's almost just unique, and we don't see much like it. Well, today, Vincent van Gogh is definitely a popular artist, and he's beloved. Looking back at the past, we really appreciate what he offered to the artistic world. So much so that there's an entire museum dedicated to his works in Amsterdam. I've been to this museum and it's wonderful. It has this effect in how they exhibit it where you start at the bottom of the museum and you see his earliest works, and you can actually move up each level and you're slowly going through the timeline of his life. It's a really wonderful museum if you have a chance to visit it. That's certainly a sign that he's so beloved that he has his own museum, but there's special exhibits that have gone through museums just for him. In fact, there was one in 2019 that shows off his work in a kind of digital format where things were projected all across the room. And I think that's a wonderful way in which you could experience Van Gogh, is being consumed by the colors and shapes and textures of his work. Just looking at the ground of this room, you can see texture just almost piling up on itself with different layers of paint. So if Vincent van Gogh is popular now, how was he received during his time when he was alive? And the answer is he wasn't really received well, and he didn't make money off of his paintings. In fact, he only sold one painting as far as I've been able to study, and that was to his brother Theo. And that introduces the relationship that was most important to him. If he didn't have much success with the public, he really had to rely on a relationship that motivated him to keep painting, and that was a relationship he had with his little brother Theo. Theo would become Van Gogh's greatest confidant. He relied on Theo to be able to bounce off ideas with his artistic creations. He didn't know exactly how he could understand the world, and he used these conversations he had with Theo to better have clarity on what he was doing and what he was feeling. So really, this relationship was so pivotal to how his work progressed the way it did. We do know so much about Van Gogh, and that's because he wrote almost 600 letters that we now have between himself and Theo. And this correspondence enables us to almost have a journaling of what was going on in Van Gogh's life as he continued to progress as a painter. So by following these journal entries, we can catch a glimpse of what interests Van Gogh, what he is feeling at different moments in his life. He had many problems and challenges that he dealt with, and most of those were with mental illness. He suffered from depression and anxiety, and many physicians looking backwards would also diagnose that he might have had some sort of bipolar disorder. So imagine what it would be like trying to express your perspectives of the world while grappling with these illnesses and trying to just breathe and keep going day to day. It's a really wonderful thing looking back that we have these letters, that we can see what was going on, and we can compare that to the paintings he created and really have this interesting journey that we can see unfold. So much so that movies have been made about Van Gogh that are wonderful to watch. There's one that has been recently made called At Eternity's Gate, and it really does show off some of that internal struggle and the emotional side of Van Gogh that honestly ignited his brilliance. The reason why he was so wonderful and now is so appreciated is because of this emotional side that he was so willing to express, the vulnerability of Van Gogh. The one that I think is artistically so wonderful is one called Loving Vincent, and this is an incredible endeavor. It is a painting based movie. So the stop animation that's typically done would be, either digital or drawings. But in this case, this type of movie was created by only oil paintings. And it's a special tribute to Van Gogh. So imagine the creation of 65,000 oil paintings and using those as the framework for the movie. It is just a wonderful artistic expression just to make the movie itself, but then it beautifully represents Van Gogh's personality and his creations that we can appreciate. Going back to that point of understanding him through letters, we do know he progressed a lot, and his earliest works are actually a sign of his lack of formal training. He did have a time period where he worked as an art dealer, so he was exposed to art. He had that relationship of seeing good artists and had made a few connections as an art dealer, one of which would be connecting later on in his life with Paul Gauguin, who would be his roommate for a time. But looking at this early work, you can see the way he handles the human figure is somewhat intentionally stylized, but in other ways, it seems like he doesn't quite understand anatomy and proportions to a fullness that he could do naturalism. So he's lacking a little bit of the skill, but that didn't prevent him from fully expressing what he was seeing. And in this wonderful painting called The Potato Eaters, I think what we can understand most about the early Van Gogh is actually his emotional state. He didn't quite enjoy being in the public. He felt an anxiety around others so often that he didn't want to associate with too many people. The only people he did feel comfortable with would be those who were very poor, and this Potato Eaters painting expresses the type of people he actually felt comfortable around. A counterpoint to that would be a later painting called The Night Cafe, which is actually painted quite similar in time frame to The Starry Night that we'll study. Looking at this painting, you can see the approach of people, the emptiness of this room is kind of eerie, but then the way this man looks directly at the viewer here is as if Van Gogh is the viewer and he's looking outward. The vibrations, the light, these uncomfortable colors. You can feel the tension it might have been for Van Gogh to be in the public. It's so often that his representations are almost off from a distance and he's just an observer. He doesn't want to be fully with people. He just likes to observe life. Well, let's kind of look at a great quote that I think really summarizes why I think Van Gogh is not just a great painter, but a great person. I love this quote. It says, "I feel that there's nothing more truly artistic than to love people. If you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. Love many things, for therein lies the true strength. And whosoever loves much, performs much, and can accomplish much. And what is done in love is done well." I think there's a tender heart that you can almost find in this quote. Van Gogh is someone who truly wanted to express the world in a unique way. And I think it was with great care that he loved people, even though he might not have felt so comfortable with his anxieties around them. He really loved the world that he got to experience. So as we look at Vincent van Gogh's works, we're going to group him in with the Post-Impressionists. The Post-Impressionists were collectively working towards a style of art that could be more expressive. As they looked at Impressionism, they found that its greatest flaw was that it wasn't sufficient in expressing deeper emotions. It might have had the instant feelings and kind of shallow emotions of what you experience, but not the depth that they wanted. So Post-Impressionists reacted to that. And Van Gogh and Edward Munch are going to be two who are very comparable in this idea that they experienced a world from a vantage point of anxiety and fear and stress. And maybe that resonates with people. Maybe that resonates with you as you look at these works. And the psychology, even in Van Gogh's self-portraits, are wonderful to look at. How did he see himself? What was he feeling as a person and not just an artist? These are emotions that he was trying to express. Well, let's look at the specific artwork that was selected by the AP test, The Starry Night. The Starry Night is actually a painting that is titled for almost the second time for Van Gogh, because a year earlier he painted this scene called Starry Night, and this painting 1 year later would be called The Starry Night. So he had this on his mind for quite some time. He wanted to capture a night scene. In fact, he wrote to his sister and brother about the ideas of wanting so deeply to paint in plein air and paint a nighttime scene. But of course, that wouldn't be very possible if you didn't have light to actually paint with your canvas. He realized he had to approach this in somewhat of an imaginative way, and that troubled him for a time. He didn't know how he was going to do that. So we can see Van Gogh's first attempt at the Starry Night here, and that dates to 1888. The Starry Night that we'll study is 1 year later. What happens in between is really important. He has a relationship with another post-impressionist that we'll study called Paul Gauguin, and they became roommates for a period of about 2 months. And there was this relationship. Here's actually a painting of him by Gauguin. So Gauguin is painting Vincent painting sunflowers. In fact, one of his more famous paintings is the sunflowers right here. But they had this relationship that didn't quite have an equal sides. Van Gogh loved Gauguin and just admired him so much, but Gauguin couldn't stand Van Gogh. His personality was kind of a hard one to deal with. And so a fighting moment actually ensues, and it's possible that Gauguin could have cut off Van Gogh's ear, but the popular belief is that Van Gogh cut off his own ear. But whatever the case, we see that he was dealing with a whole lot of mental anguish and anxieties, and it led to this pivotal moment. Afterwards, he does find a resolution by going into a mental health hospital. So the St. Paul Asylum in Saint-Rémy is actually the point in which we see a lot of great paintings come from Van Gogh, including The Starry Night. You can actually see today it's almost used as a museum. It shows off the space that Van Gogh was living in and some of the paintings that he painted while he was in this mental health hospital. And these are wonderful paintings where he'd walk out in the courtyard, he'd look at flowers in the garden, and he'd paint them. This is actually the doctor that he worked with. And that leads to a vantage point of the AP selected work, The Starry Night. You have to understand that Impressionism is a great way to look at a visual experience, but it's not maybe the best way to look at an emotional experience. And Van Gogh is definitely dealing with an emotional experience in his life. He's gone through many challenges as a painter. He hasn't found a lot of success. He's not really thriving in his mental health, and this is where we approach this work. He's looking at a nighttime scene, and the function of this is he's truly a student and an observer of things in life, and he's studying the nighttime and its effects of light, like the moon and the stars, and how that might feel as much as it looks like something. So the sensations that you capture here is almost a vibration of light. That's something that I find so amazing about these works, is when you're close enough to them, you can actually see the thickness of paint building up. A chance to see these types of paintings yourself, try and get a good angle so you can see the thickness of paint. It's just a wonderful quality of Van Gogh's work. The quote that he has when he writes about this exact time of painting The Starry Night is, he says this: "It often seems to me that the night is even more richly colored than the day, colored with the most intense violets, blues, and greens. If you look carefully, you'll see that some stars are lemony, others have a pink, green, forget-me-not blue glow. And without laboring the point, it's clear to paint a starry sky, it's not nearly enough to put white spots on blue black." The perspective that Van Gogh has, it's so unique. And you look at this painting, and it's so beautiful, but people didn't appreciate it during his time. Now we look back at it, and we just love his style. I mean, to me, it's just so unique in the way that he's depicting light and its vibrations, but also the swirling and counter swirls of this air in the nighttime. It's almost like a breeze is passing through. You see the dark tree coming upward, and then the steeple at the bottom. All these elements just moving together, and your eye so naturally moves through the canvas. I think if we could summarize what we love about Van Gogh, is that he was authentic to what he felt. And when he saw something that he thought was beautiful, whether it was the nighttime sky or the flowers or trees that were surrounding him. He just wanted to express it, and he did it so honestly and truthfully, and I think that's what we admire most about Van Gogh.